welcome to the very second episode of Remi-Rix the Science Chick. I'm your host, Remi-Rix the Science Chick. Today I will be explaining genetic dominance. Whoopsh, whoopsh. Not that kind of dominance. You know when people talk about like dominant and recessive genes? No? Well, that's what we're talking about today. Today we are talking about dominant genes, recessive genes, codominant genes, and incompletely dominant genes? Incompletely dominant genes? Incomplete dominance. Now please keep in mind that the concepts in this video are kind of really oversimplified, and I will be explaining them with a paint model. Science and paint. It's like kindergarten. I'm referring to a scientific model here, and that's sort of something that is used to explain something that can otherwise not be explained without the thing itself. That's a bad explanation. I need a model to explain models. That's a horrible explanation. Genetic dominance was first observed by Gregor Mendel, an Austrian monk and scientist who studied peas. I'm not kidding, the man studied peas. Peas have a variety of traits. Mendel discovered that some traits showed up more often than others. He discovered that some were dominant over others. Dominant and recessive genes! Dominant genes are obviously, well, dominant over recessive genes. Onto the paint model. So you have black paint and you have yellow paint. When you mix the two, you get black paint. So black is dominant over yellow. Punnett squares! Woo! Basically a Punnett square just shows the cross of two organisms and certain traits of those organisms. In other words, wow. Scientifically, of course. Pretty much all you need to know for what I'm going to explain is that a dominant trait is represented by a capital letter and a recessive trait is represented by a lowercase letter. Remember that monk guy I was talking about, Mendel? Well, he discovered that peas can either be round or they can be wrinkled. He discovered that round is dominant over wrinkled. Say you had two plants, one that produced round peas and one that produced wrinkled peas. Each of those plants received one gene from each of their parents. So they have two different versions of the genes. Those two versions are called alleles. And if a creepy Asian guy tries to convince you that it's pronounced alleles, don't believe him. Then you have genotypes and you have phenotypes. Genotypes are the genes that you actually have. Phenotypes are the genes that actually show up. If you had a plant that produced round peas, it could either have the genotype capital R, or capital R, little r. If you had a plant that produced wrinkled peas, then it would have the genotype little r, little r. Back to the paint thing. Say an organism's phenotype is black. It could have either received one black gene from each parent, or one black gene and one yellow gene. But the only way an organism's phenotype could be yellow is if it received two yellow genes, one from each parent. Back to the peas. Say you had a plant with the genotype RR. So its phenotype would be round peas. Then you have another plant with the genotype RR. In other words, it's going to be wrinkled. It's sort of like you're multiplying genes, where the product is the genotype of the offspring. In this case, the offspring's phenotype will be round. Is it lunch yet? On to codominance and incomplete dominance. Incomplete dominance is the blending of two traits to form a new phenotype. Codominance is where both traits are equally dominant and they both show. Paint model time! Incomplete dominance is sort of like when you mix blue paint and yellow paint. They make green paint. Green paint is your new phenotype. Codominance is when you have two traits but they're unblended. So it's sort of like if you have two colors of paint and they remain unmixed. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Remi-Rix the Science Chick. I'm your host, Remi-Rix the Science Chick, saying go forth and do science. That's my catchphrase. And be sure to check out the extra credit video in which I try to explain stuff and how dominance is relative. I don't know how to explain the extra credit video, just click on it. Link in the not sidebar.